それで帝国になりましたので、龍谷大学世界仏教文化研究センター主催の第5回沼田智秀仏教書籍優秀賞受賞記念講演会を始めさせていただきます。本日は何かとお忙しい中、ご参集いただきましてありがとうございます。この、沼田智秀仏教書籍優秀賞受賞記念の講演会といいますのは、これはこの世界仏教文化研究センターが創設以来、この催しを持たせていただいておりますが、毎年欧米、特に英語で書かれた書物の中で大変影響のあった大変優秀内容のあるそういう書籍を、これは有志パンフレの先生方が中心となりまして、毎年一つの一冊の本を選ばれております。2018年度の選考会では本日お招き出しておりますテルアビブ大イスラエルのテルアビブ大学のロイ・ソーハー先生がお書きになりました、この本でありますが、Yogācāra Buddhist Theory of Metaphor、この本が、またブックアワードの賞を受賞されました。この賞を受賞された方につきまして、この世界仏教文化研究所の方で、日本で、龍谷大学で、毎年その受賞記念の講演をしていただくということで、本日イスラエルのテルアビブ大学からゾーハ先生がお見えになりまして、ご案内の通り What metaphors mean and do within Buddhist philosophical text Yogācāra perspective、 この、タイトルに基づいて今日は話していただきます。龍谷大学の国際世界仏教文化研究センターといたしまして、本日このような会を持つことができたことと、皆様が形でご参加いただきましたことを申し上げます。また本日この講演につきましては、コメンテーターとして龍谷大学名誉教授でありますと同時に、現在は実はこの沼田ブックアワードを授与されておられる仏教伝道協会の方の理事長ということで、一番理事長でも桂先生が今日はコメンテということで、一応50分ほどお話をいただいた後、桂先生からコメントをいただき、そしてフロアを交えて少しディスカッションができればというふうに考えております。Thank you very much for coming today. We are very pleased and honored to have you here, and we are very looking forward to this special lecture. それで開会に先立ちまして、本日仏教伝道協会の方から常務理事を務めておられます青木晴美様がご出席でございますが、一言、仏教伝道協会を代表して言葉をいただきたいと思いますので、どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for Professor Lloyd Sokas. We are very glad to receive your special lecture today, and thank you very much for coming to Kyoto in Japan. I think your first time visiting Japan. それから皆さんどうも本日はお忙しい中ですね、ロイ・ツォーハ先生の講義にご参加いただきありがとうございます。私の仏教伝道協会は沼田智秀アワードをですね、スタートして今回が、5回目ですか、5回目のでございまして、 この講座を日本ではまず龍谷大学様で、開催させていただいておりまして、今回も中先生には大変お世話になっております。ありがとうございます。こういった機会でですね、彼の講義を聞けるということの楽しさっていうのは、多分私はあまりよく分かんないかもしれませんが、皆さんは本当によく分かると思うので、楽しんでいただければと思いますので、よろしくお願いいたします。本日はどうもありがとうございます。
川内様ありがとうございました。それでただいまより、本日の講演者のゾハ先生に What metaphors means and do within Buddhist philosophical text Yogācāraのバスでご講演いただきました。So please, Professor Law.
Thank you very much. Do I need the microphone? I think, yeah. Is that good? Okay, so thank you very much, Zaki Sensei, for this introduction, and for all of you, and for Katsura Sensei for commenting and reading the paper, and for BDK for supporting this trip and making this event possible, and to people that assisted, Kikukawa Sensei and Mr. Rogi, also from BDK Tokyo. Thank you everyone for your help. I'm honored and delighted to be here. This is my first time in Japan, and I'm very much excited, and I want to thank everyone and also you for being here, for your presence here, and I hope that I'll be coherent. I'm after a long flight, and I'm a bit jet-lagged. I landed yesterday, so I'm a little bit in a Yogācāra world. Everything looks like a vignappi to me. So I'll try to make sense, and I hope it comes through. What I have here in the PowerPoint presentation is mostly excerpts from my lecture, that you have it, the ones that have the paper, and some of the text, which I will not read fully, so you can either follow the paper or follow the PowerPoint, whatever works for you. Okay. At the root of human suffering, according to the Buddhists, if we may put it simply, lies a deep discord between how we ordinarily conceive of reality and how it truly is. A major factor in actively creating and maintaining this discord is language, and the way in which our conceptual scheme powers attempt to fix as permanent and desperately hold on to what is by nature a fleeting and fluctuating stream of events. In this respect, language is not merely a veil that obscures true reality, but an active force, according to some of the Buddhist schools, actually a causal element involved in its fabrication. It is the metaphysical workshop in which entities are forged and once produced are erroneously believed to be real. Language is therefore part of the disease, but inevitably it is also part of the cure. This is because, on the one hand, while Buddhist thought is underlined by a deep devaluation of language as a means for representing, describing, or reaching reality, on the other hand, insofar it is required for any salvific discourse, language is viewed as necessary for liberation. At the heart of Buddhist philosophical thought, then, lies the paradox that is language. As a consequence, Buddhist philosophical texts present a palpable tension that arises from the need, inherently paradoxical, to argue against words with words, to devalue language through language. Resolving, or at least in some way containing this tension, was arguably one of the main challenges confronted by Indian Buddhist thought. And indeed, the story of Indian thought, there's a lot of narratives where you can present Buddhist philosophy, but one of them is the way that different Buddhist schools dealt with this problem of language and representation in concepts. This presentation, and also basically this book, focuses on the ingenious response to this tension that one Buddhist school, the early Indian Yogācāra, roughly 3rd to 6th century CE, proposed through its sweeping claim that all language use is in fact metaphorical, Okachara, which I translate here as metaphor. There could be other translations as well. So here, at this lecture today, I will effectively be summarizing and developing a little bit the argument I have made in my monograph titled The Buddhist Yogācāra Theory of Metaphor, which was released in 2018 by OUP. The book explores what I take to be the profound philosophical implications of the school's, the Yogācāra pan-metaphorical claims, and makes the case for viewing the Yogācāra account of metaphor as a broadly conceived theory of meaning, one that is applicable, in the words of the 6th century philosopher Stiramati, both in the world, loka, and in treatises, shastra. This theory of meaning, I argue in the book, allowed the Yogācāra to carve out a position that is quite exceptional in the Buddhist landscape, a position that views ordinary language as incapable of representing or reaching reality, but at the same time justifies the meaningfulness of the school's own metaphysical and salvific discourse. This scheme, I argue, revises our interpretation of the Yogācāra by radically reframing the school controversy with the Madhyamika, I will talk about it later on, by reinstating the place of Stiramati, who is known for his commentaries as an innovative thinker in his own right, and by establishing the importance of the school's contribution to Indian philosophy of language and its potential contribution to contemporary discussions of related topics in philosophy and the study of religion. Furthermore, the book is also about the wider Indian philosophical conversation about meaning around the middle of the first millennium. Excuse me. For some of what the Yogācārans had to say about metaphor was highly innovative, their reflections on this issue should be understood against the backdrop and as conversing with specific theories of meaning put forward by such by non-Buddhist schools. So a detailed presentation of this intertextual context is beyond the scope of this presentation. The issue is taken up in about 4 chapters of the book, so a large portion, a large chunk of the book is actually dealing with the presentation of Okachara in non-Buddhist schools, like the Nyaya, Mimamsa, the grammarian, especially Bhartrahari, and also with non-Yogācāra Buddhist sources like the Abhidharma, especially the Abhidharma Kosha and its commentaries, Samahayana Sutras, and Dignaga's Pramana Samuchaya. And what this exploration of this exploration of these sources reveal, basically, it uncovers an intense philosophical conversation about metaphor and language that took place in India during that time and which reached across sectarian lines. This picture reframes the usual depiction of the Buddhist thought of the period as somewhat isolated and less engaged in exchange with non-Buddhist philosophical schools. So the view that actually a philosophical dialogue begins with Dignaga. It actually begins, it's earlier in a way, and it's already present there even in the early Yogācāra, in Nagarjuna to some extent, and so on. And you can see, I should add, that you can see really a tight influence between these schools. So it's not just ideas, but basically idioms, terminology, formulas, for instance. Vasubandhu, when he talks about Okachara in the Abhidhamma Kosha Bhashya, then he takes formulas from the Mimamsa Sutra and Bhashya. So Zarizi apparently knows these materials and uses them in his work in a Buddhist context. And finally, the book is about how Buddhist thinkers reflected on and understood the metaphorical function of language and about what metaphors mean and do within Buddhist philosophical texts. Figurative language is palpably present in Buddhist philosophical texts in general and in the Yogācāra lore in particular. Yet there are relatively few existing studies of this topic. And when theorizing, these studies tend to appeal to contemporary philosophical and literary theories of metaphors, like conceptual metaphors and so on. In the present study, by contrast, I attempted to reconstruct the body of theory and metaphor as formulated by Buddhist thinkers, that is, using their own terms. So I present here a Yogācāra theory of metaphor, not a modern kind of theory. This body of theory, as I have mentioned, is most conspicuously present in the early Yogācāra treatises ascribed to Asanga and Vasubandhu, and their later commentators, especially Stiramati, so roughly between the 4th and 6th centuries CE. Here, the subject of figurative usage is taken up as part of a broader philosophical engagement with the relation between language and reality, and the concept of Okachara metaphor often features prominently and in many occasions. So it's not a discourse about aesthetics, it's not a discourse about upaya, for instance, or teaching. It's a philosophical discourse about theories of meaning. Perhaps the most complete elaboration of this interest is found in Stiramati's lengthy commentary on Vasubandhu's treatise in 30 verses, the Trimchika Bhashya, which offers a figurative theory of meaning of sorts by arguing that all language use is in fact merely metaphorical. But how is this pan-figurative view, pan-metaphorical view possible? What does this claim entail in terms of the understanding of ordinary, everyday language? And what are Stiramati's motivations for making it? It's a kind of an absurd argument that all language is metaphorical. Why argue that? In the following, I wish to address these questions by outlining Stiramati's view of language and metaphor in his Trimchika Bhashya, discuss a little bit the implications for the Yogācāra overall understanding of experience, and if time allows, for the school system of hermeneutics. So first, what is metaphor, Okachara? While the broad and varied context of this conversation does not seem to offer anything like a standardized and unified account of Okachara, we do find certain common features and presuppositions underlying the various thinkers' understanding of the term. And these are both Buddhist and non-Buddhist thinkers. These features are usually presented in terms of several necessary conditions, nimitta, for the occurrence of figurative meaning. Among these, I'm very proud in this slide. Among these, I would like to focus on the condition that deals with metaphor's underlying referential mechanism and represents an understanding of metaphor as the absence of the primary referent from the locus of reference. I will clarify in a minute that these terms are taken from the Sanskrit grammarians, which understand locus, or designations in terms of loci, in terms of locus in the Saptami case ending in Sanskrit. So let us look at one of the Indian stock examples of metaphor. Bahike Gau. The Bahika is a bull. This is an example Stiramati uses. A Bahika is a person from the northwest, a foreigner. So someone from the Punjab maybe even further away. And this rather xenophobic example names him a bull because of certain similarities with the beast. The person is very stout, big, and dull-witted. So when you want to call someone who is exceptionally big physically and slow in mind, so you call him a bull, is a bull, and that's derogatory terms. And that's a metaphor, right? You call a person a bull. So you come over here, you bull. So in this case, the primary referent of the word bull would be the bull, right? The direct reference of the word, the thing that the word refers to, which can be either a particular or universal, right? A dravya, gati, depends on the various Indian theories of meaning, while the actual referent of the word bull, or its locus of reference, that which the phrase refers to, figuratively, is the person. Okay, so that's when I'm talking about the locus of reference. Therefore, calling the person a bull is figurative only when the primary referent, that is the bull, of the expression bull, is absent from the locus of reference, that is the baita, the person. That is, in brief, calling a person a bull is figurative when there is no bull in the person. Primary referent of the word bull is absent from the locus of reference, that to which we refer. All this may seem counterintuitive, given that in Western post-Aristotelian philosophical discourse, we seem to refer to what is best understood as a metaphoric transference, which occurs when a word that has one meaning is understood to have another additional meaning. In the Indian philosophical context, it would seem more appropriate to refer to secondary attribution, which mark cases in which a referent is denoted not by its usual word, but through semantic or cognitive imposition or superimposition by some other word. Thus, the emphasis in Indian discourse is not on an altered meaning of a word, but on a difference in the referential relations between the word and its referent. So basically, in the post-Aristotelian discourse, we would say that the word bull has one direct meaning and has another figurative meaning for a person when you use it to a person. And therefore, a word can have different meanings. For the Indian theories of meaning, a word has only one meaning, that is the direct reference. And when we use it indirectly to refer to something else, so that is marked by an absence of the referent from the thing we refer to. Please feel free to stop me and ask questions if something is unclear. Yes, please.
If this is a I wonder whether this absence of primary referent can be necessary conditions for the figurative metaphor, because if that is the case, any person or anything can be figuratively called.
Exactly. This is it's a great question, and it moves me onto my next slide, which I'll show in a minute, because this is exactly the point, that for the Buddhist, everything will be figurative, because if we understand metaphor to be based on referential relations, and the Yogācāra will argue that basically the referent is always absent from the locus of reference, and everything is figurative. But this definition of figurative meaning is not just special for the Yogācāra. This is the bedrock definition for all the Indian schools, philosophical schools. It's taken from the Nyaya Sutra. That's its origin, probably, and then it's replicated. So there are other nimitta, similarity between the referents and so on, but this is the basic condition. Without this is a necessary condition for metaphor. Thank you for that. Within this framework, in which a discourse of meaning was overwhelmingly semantics-oriented, the understanding of figurative use is constituted by the absence, ontological or actual, of a referent poses a serious challenge to theories that maintain a strong world-word correspondence, like the Mimamsa, right? Yogācāra, as we will shortly see, and here I get to Katsura Sensei question, were quick to capitalize on this thread from the direction of figurative meaning. For them, this absence becomes a defining feature of any language use. The bull, they would say, is in fact always absent from the locus of reference. It is because it is non-existent. It is a compounded object, and the latter are mere conceptual constructs, prajnaptisat. Right? The bull really does not exist, so it's always absent. And the same is true also in the case of the person or any other word for that matter, and hence all language use is inescapably figurative. But let me explain that through stages. Let us now turn to Stiramati's commentary on the first verse of Vasubandhu treatise in 30 verses, Trimshika. And I will only read part of this lengthy commentary. In your handouts, you have more than I will read, and this is also not the entire commentary. The entire section is translated in the book, just because of time constraints. So. I'm missing the slide here. Sorry, so I'll just read. You have it in your handout. This is the first one. This is the verse from the Trimshika. The metaphor, Okachara, of things, dharma, and of self in its various forms, which is set in motion, that is to say, this is Stiramati, that is to say, in the world and in treatises, that is with reference to the transformation of consciousness, Vijnana Parinama. Stiramati explains that the verse uses the term self and things, dharma, generic terms for all substantive entities from the subjective perspective and the objective perspective. But why are these referred to as metaphors? An explanation is provided in the following passage. And this metaphor of two kinds, of the self and things, is applied in reference to the transformation of consciousness, and not to a primary actual self or things, a mukhya pradana. Why so? Since these do not exist outside of the transformation of consciousness. What is it that is termed transformation? The state of being otherwise than what it previously was. So the things that these metaphors refer to are non-existent, and what you have instead is the Vijnana Parinamaha, the evolvement of consciousness. And what is this involvement? This evolvement means change. Right? It's actually, later he says it's pratitya samutpada. It's the Buddha's kind of fluctuating stream of events. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'm going to this one. Hence, the metaphor of things such as matter, etc., and the metaphor of the self and the like, having taken at its base, upadaya, the appearance, nirbhasa of matter, etc., and of self, etc., which because of mental construction, vikalpa, appear as if they were external, these things appear to us, and if they were outside, but if just vikalpa, occurs from time immemorial, even without an external self and things, like in the case of the metaphor of the floaters, etc., viewed by a person inflicted by an eye disease, timira. So this is the classic Yogācāra example of illusion, right? A person that sees two moons or sees some objects in front of his eyes, but they're seen as external, they're objectively existent, but they're not. They're imagined to be there. And here Stiramati calls them Okachara, these things. And here he gives a definition of Okachara. This definition is from the Nyaya Sutra. And that which is not existent there at the locus of reference is figuratively designated, Ukacharayate, like in the phrase, the Bahika person is an ox. I'll go on and then I'll explain. I'm jumping to the second section here. And because of the impossibility of metaphor without a support near adhara, the occurrence of metaphors of the self and things should be necessarily regarded as actually being the transformation of consciousness. So he repeats that, and then I'm jumping ahead. I'm going over the argument against the Madhyamika. I will return to that later. And I'm reading something really at the end. And thus, since there is no correlation of an object with a word, language and knowledge do not exist. Thus, because of the non-existence of an expression and of a thing to be expressed, a primary object does not exist. And all that is merely figurative, gauna, another primary meaning, secondary meaning, another primary meaning. Okay, this is a mess, right, from what I've read. So to make sense of this rather abstruse passage, we need some background on the Yogācāra metaphysics. Now, the question of the nature of the early Yogācāra ontological commitments, that is, whether or not the school promotes philosophical idealism, and of what kind, metaphysical, epistemological, as being the topic of an ongoing scholarly controversy. I'm not going to solve it here, or even propose a solution. I do that in the book. Bracketing for now the question of how spiritualistic claims are situated with respect to this controversy, whether he's an idealist or not, it can be read either way. There seems to be a scholarly consensus that the treatise's argumentative starting point is the stance that, 1, external objects do not exist as they appear. All Yogācāra would agree on that, right? Things do not appear to us, do not exist as they appear to us. And 2, that all existence can be known or discussed solely in terms of mental representations, vijñāpti. So when we talk about objects, we don't talk about individual external objects, but representation, mental representation. Within this framework, whereas in ordinary language we understand the term person or bull to refer to objective and external things, the Yogācāra would say that in fact all we can relate to are the mental appearances, nirphasa, akara, of a person or a bull, which appear as if they were objectively and externally existent. And the paradigmatic example is of Timera, of an ibisis. These mental appearances, Tiramati further explains, are an outcome of the transformation of consciousness, vijnana parinamha, that is, an interdependent causal chain of mental events, a great part of which is subliminal, is below our awareness, whatever happens in the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. But why does this render the word person or bull metaphors? Let us return to Stiramati's definition of Okachara. Yatsha yatra nasti tat tatro kacharyate, tad yatha vahike gavu. And that which is not existent there in the locus of reference is figuratively designated, like when one calls the Vahika person an ox. So here, let us focus on the person on the left-hand side of this slide. We can see that within this framework, when we call a person person, there is in fact no essential existent person there in the locus of reference, according to the Yogācāra. Only the underlying transformation of consciousness, which makes it, according to the definition stated above, a metaphor. So when we call a person, there is no person there, there is just the transformation of consciousness. So when we call person, we actually call it, we refer to the transformation of consciousness indirectly. Because that's really what there is there. There is no person there. So the person is absent from the locus of reference. The main difference between this instance and the case of the Indian stock example on the right-hand side, the one I presented earlier, is that in the Buddhist case, on the left-hand side, the primary object is always absent from the locus of reference, as the person is not existent as such, is never existent. There are no persons, according to the Buddhist and to the Yogācāra. And language, insofar as it refers to non-existent object, is therefore always figurative. It is literal only insofar it denotes directly the transformation of consciousness. So basically, when we use language, according to the Yogācāra, we're always speaking in metaphors, because the things we refer to are not really there. What we have is an underlying transformation of consciousness, which is the locus of reference, and this is what brings about appearances of persons, things, and so on, as if they were existence. So our language use is inherently metaphorical. While in this respect, Sthiromati's pan-figurative view does undermine the meaningfulness of ordinary language, it does not necessarily entail the total collapse of ordinary language or the complete absence of a word-referent correspondence. Here I agree to some extent with some people like Jonathan Gold, for instance, who's written in his book about Vasubandhu, that argued that Sthiromati seems to present here none other than a figurative theory of reference, under which, whenever we say, for example, this is a person, what this assertion actually means is the transformation of consciousness is in such and such a state, so that there is a mental appearance of a person. So when we use the word person, what we actually say is consciousness is working, evolving, so to create an image of a person and a designation that designates it, and so on. But what purpose does this position serve? Gold argues that it functions as a Yogācāra defense against the realist attack, mostly the Abhidharma, on its supposed mentalism. I wish instead to suggest that what Sthiromati presents amounts to a figurative theory of sense, not of reference, that pits itself not against realism so much as against the Madhyamika school view of language as self-referential. Let us see how this is achieved. And here time does not allow me to delve into the specifics of Sthiromati's argument, which is presented in full in the 5th chapter of my book, but I added to this paper an excerpt from the book with the argument against the Madhyamika, so you can read that and refer to that in your time. I'll just go very quickly over it, just serving it. Okay, so this is the Yogācāra theory of meaning, what comes out of Sthiromati's argument. All words, as we have seen, are figurative according to the Yogācāra and Sthiromati, because they denote objects only indirectly, referring directly to their appearances in their capacity as a transformation of consciousness. Right? The transformation of consciousness, however, is not a static state of affairs, but a causal process. Indeed, it is the very Buddhist notion of dependent origination as a causal nexus underlying all phenomena. So if we have the word pot, for instance, right? So it refers allegedly to the word pot, but there is no pot. There is just an appearance of pot, and what you have is the transformation of consciousness, which is an equals pratitya samutpada, the causal nexus that brought about the appearance of that pot. Under this scheme, under this scheme, a word does not designate an object, but rather the entire causal process by virtue of which the object appears in consciousness. So according to the Yogācāra, the reference of the word pot or the word person is the underlying ontological causal nexus that brought it about, the appearance of the pot or the person, while the sense of the word is roughly the description of this causal process. So what words refer to are not to object, but to causal processes. And the sense of the word, I mean, its cognitive value is basically the description of this causal process, a way of describing and now enumerating it and explicating it. Note that this is not the mere appearance, but also its corresponding designation and whatever other conceptual baggage it may include, because for the Yogācāra, language is causally efficacious. Okay, so the causal process is not just responsible for the appearance of a pot, but also for us calling it a pot. That is the concept, the notion of a pot, which is connected, which is part of the vasanas in the storehouse consciousness that are influenced by past conceptual experiences and so on and so forth. So conceptualization is also causal in this sense. The benefits for the Yogācāra from this rather complex understanding of meaning are multiple. First, it creates a kind of a scholastic, a shastric, meta-language that cleanses ordinary discourse of its essentialist and refined quality by understanding it in terms of causal mental descriptions, but does so without changing its basic vocabulary. This is quite straightforward. So instead of saying pot and arguing about objectively existent things, when I use pot metaphorically, I actually use a more accurate language, a more accurate description, because I mean by the word pot the appearance that is created by the transformation of consciousness, and so on and so forth. Second, this framework allows the Yogācāra to distinguish between different levels of discourse and posit a hierarchy of meaning within the conventional realm of language. Let me clarify what I mean by this. This is the important, actually, benefit for the Yogācāra. The Yogācāra takes meaning, to be like a birthday cake, or a layered cake. So you don't just have ultimate and conventional in terms of language, but actually in the convention you have different degrees of meaning, of truth values. And there is a hierarchy. You can speak more truly in some ways. You can speak more meaningfully. I'll explain how does this work. Recall that under the Yogācāra theory of meaning, what a term comes to mean is constituted by an underlying causal description. These causal descriptions, however, are not static, as seen, for instance, in the Trimshika, causal mental explanation of phenomena presupposes an evolving description, one that increases in intricacy and subtlety, and which embodies a variety of points of view on the continuum between the ordinary, deluded point of view of the Bala, on the left-hand side, and the direct knowledge of a Buddha or accomplished Bodhisattva. So, knowledge of causality is also layered. I mean, us, ordinary people, we can know causal processes to a certain extent. A person versed in Shastra, like Vasubandhu, for instance, knows perhaps these processes in greater, and a meditator or a practitioner knows these processes in greater subtlety and complexity, and a Buddha or accomplished Bodhisattva sees causal relations for what they are. Yogācāra states that explicitly. Stiramati states that in the Trimshika Bhashya, when he says that the Bodhisattva, after he reaches nirvikalpa jnana, non-conceptual knowledge, he then moves to another type of awareness called tatvishtalabdha jnana. The awareness attained subsequent to that, a secondary awareness, where he can communicate with people, he can use concepts, but without using vikalpa, and that state of affairs is characterized by the ultimate knowledge of causality. The Bodhisattva in the Tat-Prishtala Jnana knows causality, knows the dependent nature, the Paratantra, for what it is. He sees Pratitya Samutpada and can manipulate it. This is the phase where Bodhisattva creates miracle, turns earth into gold, and so on. Okay. So, while for the simpleton, the word pot for the bala on the left-hand side, the word pot refers to an objectively existent pot. For an adept informed by Shastra and practice, it comes to mean the activity of the 8 modes of consciousness, and this continues until an exhaustive, direct knowledge of causal relations as the dependent nature achieved by the accomplished Bodhisattva. Note that this account renders meaning as one, dependent upon point of view. Right? What the word pot means, the description of the causal process, changes upon your perspective. If you're a simpleton, you have one description. If you're a Buddha, you have a different description. And second, the meaning is hierarchically organized, since insofar as some speakers' causal descriptions are more accurate or insightful than others, the respective use of language is also more meaningful. So when a Buddha or advanced Bodhisattva uses the word pot, and a Bala uses the word pot, the Buddha's use of language is more meaningful. It is more true, because it refers to a more explicit, whole, accurate causal description. While the Yogācāra accept that all discourse is indeed conventional, its figurative nature and objective causal underpinning imply that some claims are more meaningful than others. But why is this important for the Yogācāra? One reason is perhaps that it works well with its soteriology. This understanding of conventional discourse as inherently layered in terms of meaning and truth seems structurally to fit, to map onto the school theoretical models and view of the stages of the path. So, time does not allow me to go into a detailed exposition of these claims, but I will note that they all share a certain gradualism. Insofar they allow a dialectical movement of understanding through which erroneous accounts of the same reality are replaced by more accurate ones, up to final knowledge of an accomplished bodhisattva. So this layered scheme of meaning, of language, maps to the Yogācāra soteriological models. This is from the Madhyanta Vibhagatika, ascribed to Stiramati. We don't know really if it's Stiramati, but it's in the Yogācāra tradition. And you have 3 different modes of language use that are connected to different natures of the Trisvabhava realm, and to 3 uses of language. And here you can see it with kind of the progress along the path, the kind of the states that you reached. So as you follow the path and you move through the 3 natures, or knowledge of the 3 natures, you also have different understanding of causality and of the chitta dharmata, the nature of consciousness. So for them, this view of language is part of the general structural gradualism that they present in other instances as well. But this is just one reason why they take upon it, and I don't think that the most important one. Another reason why this model is important for the Yogācāra has to do with their need to address the difficulties created by the Buddhist ambivalence towards language. And here I return to the question I began with, the question that underlies the book. As on one hand, incapable of truly representing and describing ultimate reality, and all Buddhists would say the language is conventional. But on the other hand, as necessary for salvific discourse and for the possibility of liberation. In respect to the latter, the Yogācāra was not merely concerned with the meaningfulness of conventional, ordinary language, but in particular with the meaningfulness of its own Buddhist metaphysical discourse, which came under attack by the Madhyamika. So the main problem for the Yogācāra is a metaphysical school. It has, regardless if it's idealist or not, it has ontological arguments and commitments. It is ready to argue much more in terms of ontology than the Madhyamika. And for that, its philosophical stance is much more fragile. Now, if you argue about reality with language, if you have a system of metaphysics, that language has to be meaningful. But how does this work if all language is conventional? And nothing is meaningful, right? Everything is used only conventionally. So the Yogācāra has to make a distinction between different levels of meaning, like language that we use meaningfully in ordinary language and language that we use meaningfully in salvific discourse. I'll explain what I mean in greater detail. We'll probably end with that. So this is the text, this is the argument against the Madhyamika. The Madhyamika, I won't read it, I'll just rephrase the argument. The Madhyamika represents a different way to solve this tension, the tension of language, right? By viewing discourse as merely instrumental, language, according to this view, is self-referential, referential closed system. I'm referring here to Nagarjuna. Of course, Okachara can correct me about this. Right? Language is a self-referential closed system, unable to give any information about reality, direct reference. And the role of philosophical discourse is hence to make this evident by applying a destructive dialectic that brings language to its limits. So this is the emptiness of emptiness, basically. What is language? Language is conventional, and the use of language shows you this way through philosophical argumentation and refutation. From this ensues, however, the Yogācāra argues, Srimati argues, the flattening of conventional discourse. All claims, all our language claims, whether they are about ultimate reality or about ordinary objects, medium-sized dry goods, as analytical philosophers like to argue, are thus equally referenceless and empty. Right? When I argue reality is pratitya samutpada, and I argue when I say all existence is suffering, and when I say I missed the bus, or this is a cup, basically all my assertions are conventional, referenceless, and meaningful or meaningless in the same degree. And this is a solution that will be embraced by the Madhyamika. The Madhyamika says, right, because everything is conventional, because discourse is conventional. But language can show us the ultimate reality. But this solution cannot work for the Yogācāra. This is because the Yogācāra, like the Madhyamika, presents an explicit metaphysical discourse, claims regarding an underlying causal and mental ontology. And it needs to defend the meaningfulness of this philosophical discourse, to defend the possibility of describing reality in a way that is not merely negative. That is, to distinguish between the meaningfulness of assertions like, this is a cup, and life is full of suffering. Buddha Vachana has to be more meaningful for the Yogācāra. Because they accept Agama, but this is a different topic. This need is met by the school figurative theory of meaning, which allows it to present a notion of meaning in discourse according to some descriptions of reality, although merely conventional, must be more meaningful than others. This allows the Yogācāra, therefore, to carve a position that is quite exceptional in the Buddhist landscape, a position that views ordinary language as incapable of representing or reaching reality, but at the same time justifies the meaningfulness of the school's own metaphysical discourse. So I return again to this notion of the theory of meaning, right, and the degrees of meaning. So you see, all discourse, Yogācāra agrees that all discourse is conventional. All use of concepts, is something conventional and unreal. But within conventional discourse, you can have different levels of meaning. When a Buddha says something, he talks, he refers to something which is much more elaborate, accurate, and subtle than when a simple person talks. Discourse is forever conventional, but you can see different level of meanings, and that justifies the Yogācāra's own metaphysical discourse facing the Madhyamika critique, that basically saying to them, it's, Vijnana, you talk about Vijnana Parinama and so on, but it's all words, it's all concepts, basically, and there's nothing substantive, and everything is merely conventional. So this is the Yogācāra attempt to defend their view. I have a lot more here, but I think I'll end now, because I think I reached the end of my time, basically. I'll just say a couple of words without really reading, just explaining, because that's actually where I'm getting to the stuff that is interesting for me. What this enables to do for the Yogācāra, so it creates this language that is more accurate. It enables the Yogācāra to kind of face the Madhyamika critique. The Yogācāra always loses the argument, when facing the Madhyamika. The Madhyamika argument is always better philosophically. But the Yogācāra says there is a price to pay for making this argument. And the argument is that all discourse, suddenly, all the Prajnaparamita and all the Mahayana Sutras are conventional in the same way as ordinary discourse. And we want to have agama, right? We want to have it, and they accept, both Asanga and Vasubandhu accept a little bit like the non-Buddhist Shabda. They accept the sutras as a pramana. So, and we want to maintain that status of scripture. We want to say that our metaphysical discourse is actually more accurate than just mere discourse, ordinary discourse. So this is one way of doing it. But also, it's very important to them because Yogācāras are Yogācāras. They are deeply engaged in meditation and concerned with meditation. And one of the main issues that they are confronted by is what happens to the Bodhisattva after, in samsara. How come the Bodhisattva that is supposed to have reached near Vikalpa Jnana, non-conceptual awareness, which is a premise for the Yogācāra, operates in the world? How does he communicate? And basically, how can a Bodhisattva, advanced Bodhisattva or a Buddha communicate with a person? How can he speak to him, for instance? How can he teach him? And again, for the Madhyamika, I would say, well, he uses language, but he uses that conventionally. But Yogācāra has to posit that within a system of meditation as well. And he does so by basically arguing that after non-conceptual awareness, there is this state that I've mentioned of Tat-Prishta Labdha-Jnana. That is a bodhisattva that has reached non-conceptual awareness, is now operating within the world. He's using language, or she's using language to communicate to people. She's performing, she's acting in the world, but it's a completely different understanding of language use and actions. Right? The actions are not intentional in the sense of agency. There is no ahamkara there. There is no self, sense of self there. And language is used only conventionally. And for the Yogācāra want to argue, well, how does this bodhisattva use that language? He uses language, he sees causality. When he uses the language pot or suffering, he sees the entire causal process that stands behind this world and what this word refers to. So the Yogācāra theory of meaning is also meant as a way of overcoming incommensurability. Incommensurability in the modern philosophical sense. That is, incommensurability is a problem in the sense that we might be using the same word but talking cross purposes. That is actually the famous example of Hillary Putnam was someone coming from Mars, paraphrase on Wittgenstein example, and uses the word water or red. And we're talking between us, but how do we know if meaning is in the head? How do we know that when he refers to water, it's the same thing that we refer to water? And in the same way, how do we know that when a bodhisattva talks about something and we are talking about something, we are referring to the same way? And not just bodhisattva, but also, which is something that really interests the Yogācāra, pretas. Speaking about rivers and examples that bodhisattva uses, right? That this is my icon for pretas. This is a person. So people and pretas see the same river. Right? The pretas are in the peripheries of our world, but where people see clear, clean waters, the preta sees rivers of pus and filth, which is part of their karma. So we have an object. We see it differently, we conceive of it differently. How can we communicate about it? We can communicate about it if we have a theory of meaning that actually traces the meaning of the words, not to objects, because there's no rivers there, but to their causal processes that brought them about, basically to karma. Right? So the Preta's karma that brings about this river of pus, and our karma that brings about this river of clear water, and the Buddha's perception that sees everything that goes on there for the Preta and for us is actually framed in causal processes under this theory of meaning. So this theory of meaning is also important for the Yogācāra to explain how bodhisattvas and how Buddhas and persons can communicate. And also, I do that later on in the chapter 6 of the book, to their account of experience and intersubjectivity, and also of hermeneutics. But I don't have time to go into that. So thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Professor White, for how you are very powerful and very elaborate explanation as to your understanding of the metaphor in the context of the Yogācāra. And also your presentation is a lot of provocative issues that maybe we have a good discussion if we need. And now I'd like to ask the Yogācāra to comment on this presentation, and maybe we just open up our discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very interesting and provocative presentation. Maybe yes. Yes, I tried to read your paper 3 or 4 times, and this morning I read a few reviews on your book, Yogācāra, Buddhist Theory of Metaphor, that are available online. I'm sure you have it. Namely, those by Jens Schlitter, Malcolm Keating, and Matthew Osborne. Among them, I share the same reaction to your work as Keating. He says that you argue for 3 main conclusions about Stilmat's view of language. Namely, 1, Stilmat holds a pan-metaphorical theory of meaning. 2, Stilmat uses it to argue against the corresponding theory of meaning and the Madhyamaka Buddhist radical conventionalism about meaning. And 3, Stilmat uses the metaphorical theory of meaning to avoid the charges of incommensurability and he uses it to argue for the meaningfulness of ordinary discourse, which allows Buddhists to avoid the charge of incommensurability, and which also explains how bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who remain in the world to assist others along the Buddhist path, engage in linguistic practices. I'm not so sure whether you agree with this summary or not, but I'm most interested in his third conclusion, or your third conclusion. From the early period of Indian Buddhism, things like Nirvana and Dharmata have been regarded as something beyond our analytical or conceptual thinking and beyond our designation. Abhidharma philosophers distinguish the two levels of Buddha's discourses, namely the one, Samgrisatya, that is conveyed by an ordinary language and that can be understood by ordinary people, and the other, Paramartha Satya, that is conveyed by Buddhist technical terms, that is dharmas, and that can only be understood by those who have learned Buddhist doctrines. From this point of view, everything can be expressed by an ordinary language or the language of dharmas. Nonetheless, I believe at least some Abhidharmikas must have recognized incommunicability of the ultimate reality or truth. It is in the Prajnaparamita literature and Nagarjuna that we find a strong idea of incommunicability of the ultimate reality and truth. For example, in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Nagarjuna first states in the Mangala Shloka that Buddha taught the doctrine of dependent origination, Pratitya Samutpada. Yet, he says in the Karika, chapter 25, 24 CD, the last verse of 25, chapter 25, that the Buddha taught no dharma at all to anybody at any time. On the surface, this is a sheer contradiction, though Nagarjuna would solve the contradiction by resorting to his version of the theory of two truths, two satyas. Now you seem to understand that Stirner's pan-metaphorical theory of meaning can solve the problem of how to communicate the ultimate reality or truth by means of linguistic expression. In other words, Stirner believed that one can convey the ultimate reality or truth by metaphors. I find that this is a completely new and innovative approach to the problem, and that we should take it seriously. Nobody has stated this idea before. And in other words, I think you have succeeded in this respect regarding the third conclusion that Keating suggests. Now, the most serious problem with your work is how to understand the term Yogācāra. Sheila suggests semantic imposition, or more precisely, conceptual superimposition would be a better way to render the meaning of Yogācāra. And Keating, based on his understanding of Yogācāra, had the same opinion and proposes to translate Yogācāra by superimposition, not metaphor. I have the same opinion, and in order to show that, I quote a few passages from Srimati and his commentator, Vinitade. Okay, first we have this, the very first verse of Trishka, Atmadharma Bacharo hi vivido yaha pravartate, Lokashastra yori iti vakya sheshaha, vijnana parinamyasa. And this is your translation. The metaphor, Bachara, of things, dharma, and of self in its various forms, which is set in motion, pravartate. That is to say, in the word and in treatises, that is with reference to the transformation of consciousness. Okay, I have some comments. Yeah, so this is about, except for Lokashastra Yogi Vakya Shesha. the body cells was stated by Vasubandhu. And Vasubandhu certainly was very well aware of the usage of Okachara in the sense of metaphor. So one example I quoted here from the Kosha is Manchaha quotient, I'm sure. There are two interpretations of this sentence. But by the way, you know the Karls in Cambridge? Professor Karls, K-A-H-R-S. No, not your generation. Okay, Karls was originally from Sweden or Denmark, and he's now, I think he's still teaching at Cambridge. He's Alan Karika.
Oh, yeah.
And he wrote, long time ago, he wrote one small article on Manchaha quotient. You did not mention that paper in your... Okay, okay. So there are two interpretations of Manchaha quotient. One is according to Karl's, the Causality, the baby beds are crying. But there's another interpretation is flowers or seeds are shouting. Yeah, strangely, there are two interpretations. But anyway, this is a typical case of Okachara, example of Okachara. So I'm sure, but I think Vasubandhu is probably using the term Okachara in this verse in the sense of metaphor. Okay, so at least in this verse, Vasubandhu's, I think Vasubandhu means by the term Okachara metaphor or metaphorical expression. And I quoted some. So Okachara is commonly used, as you mentioned in your discussing your book, not only at Dhammakosha, but Dignaga, Dharmakirti. So for example, Dignaga is Abhayave Samudaya Okachara. When he defines the idea of paksha, this is proportional thesis, he says there are three meanings, there are three differences of the term paksha. And paksha is of course the term for samudaya, the assertion or proposition. But paksha can be applied to the subject of assertion as well as predicate of assertion. So in that context, he uses the term abhayave, samudaya okachara. Well, then, so he means we can metaphorically apply the name of the whole samudaya to its parts. And another thing I mentioned here is, okay, use translated Vijnana Pariname as with reference to the transformation of consciousness. That's quite okay, but I just wanted, I tried to locate it, but somewhere I saw the interpretation of this locative as nimitta sattami. So in that case, this locative means from, or it is a locative, but caused by, or, that's exactly, that is Vijnana Parinama or Vijnana causes the appearance of Okachara or Atmadharma. So interpretation of nimitta sattami may be possible, but I could not find actual reference. So as far as Vasubandhu is concerned, I think Okachara probably means metaphor. But then take a look at the okay, so this is still this comment. Atma dharma Okachara iti sampathyate, atma dharmascha Okachariante iti atma dharma Okachara. Sattunar atma prajaptir dharma prajaptis. And so what is important is the term prajapti. And you translated imputed designation of the self and things. So, well, so my point is that this prajapti, so Siddhamati identifies or interprets Okachara by the term prajapti. And prajapti, traditionally in Buddhist philosophy, Pratyapti was always contrasted with dharmas. So Pratyapti and Pratyaptisati you mentioned in your paper is conceptual. The concept and Pratyaptisati is conceptual reality or existence against dharma as a dravyasat, real substantial reality. So that is probably the original meaning of Pratyapti. And but then Pratyapti can be interpreted as designation or verbal expression. But anyway, I want to point out this is here, Stiramati calls Okachara Pratyapti. Then on this portion, Vinitadeva, I'm sure you look at it. He identifies Okachara with Pratyapti Vyavahara. So he says Okachara, Pratyapti, Vyavahara are all paryayas, synonyms. And then he says they are probably they mean jnana as well as abhidhana. So knowledge. So Okachara has maybe two aspects: knowledge and cognition, as well as verbal expression. And later on, Vinitadeva identifies Okachara by Samaropa. So I think you discussed it in this paper or in your book that Okachara does not mean Samaropa or Adhyaropa, but at least Vinitadeva seems to identify Okachara by Samaropa. So maybe coming back to your what you says about the general definition of Okachara, Yatra na asti, Tatra Okachara something. That can also be the definition of fabrication or maybe Samaropa, Adhyaropa. So what I want to tell you today is maybe it's difficult for you now after writing this big book, but you should reconsider whether Okachara really means metaphor instead of matter. I think it means metaphor in Kaspan's case, but with these small materials, but whether you can still keep, but it may be worth reconsidering the another interpretation or meaning of Okachara. So I have something here. So according to the Indian Harikas, Shabda has two vrittis. I'm sure you know what it is, but for the other people. So two vrittis, Abhida and Lakshana. And Lakshana vritti is also called Gavana vritti and related to Okachara. Shabda has two padarthas, meanings, Mukhya padartha and Gavana padartha. It denotes, so Abhida, it's primarily referent and refers to the other secondary referent by means of Lakshana or metaphorical transference. For example, in Agni Manvaka, Agni's primary meaning or referent is fire, but can be metaphorically applied to Manvaka due to the common properties such as fierceness, etc. So I think this is a common idea of metaphor among Indian articles. Pradhana is the principal objective basis of linguistic expression. In Yogācāra, it is nothing but Vijnana Parinama. But for realists, it is Mukhya Padartha, reality. In Stiramati's metaphorical theory of meaning, there is no Mukhya Padartha. There is only Gavana Padartha, which is Vijnana Parinama, Pradhana, that is the cause of any linguistic expression. Because of the absence of Mukhya Padartha, it is difficult to apply the common understanding of Okachara to Stiramati's theory. Therefore, his Okachara is probably not metaphor. This is exactly the opponent's view in the Trinitarian version. Yes, but I do not think Srimati replied to this criticism successfully. Maybe you can explain it. Okay, just one more. Yeah, regarding the Madhyamaka position on language, I think you should consider the Karika 2410. Vyavaharam anashitya, paramartham nadeshyate, paramartham anagamya, okay, space, nirvana adhigamyate. So, Vyavahara certainly has some role or meaning in Madhyamaka philosophy. So, your idea of Madhyamaka is completely, what did you say? Yeah, Madhyamaka Buddhist radical conventionalism about meaning. I think you better reconsider, well, you better go more deeply into Madhyamaka works, especially Bhaviveka. Not Chandrakirti, but Bhaviveka has some practice, but he has a strong criticism against Yogācāra in the 5th chapter of Madhyamaka Fridaya. So there was a strong debate between Yogācāra and Madhyamaka on many subjects, but also about the language. And the final point is, Transamcha 5, you only use Richard's translation, but I'm sure you know Pin's work has been already published, and it is more, but it's a better version. So in the future, I want you to consult Pin's. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for Okachara. So, would you?
Okay. Thank you very much, Okachara Sensei, for reading the paper so closely, and also the book, and for these thoughtful points, which I'll try to respond to. Not necessarily, I'll try in the order in which you raise them. Just for the last, at the time, yeah, I was aware of that, but it was already formed and in the process. And, but I'm aware of its superiority in that sense. I'll start from the beginning, and I'll just refer to Keating's criticism. And basically, what's criticism? Criticism is that Okachara is not linguistic, that it's a superimposition, which I totally disagree with, I have to say. And I recently received some nice backing from Janardhan Ganeri in a symposium on that chapter that is in Berkeley, that is can be found online on YouTube, where he argues why Okachara is indeed linguistic, following the book. And basically, what I'm trying to do in the 4 first chapters of the book is to show how it is linguistic, in the sense that Stiramati is taking a notion that has a lot of context and is aware of that context. And I didn't present it here, it's not presented in the paper as well, but it's in the book. A major portion of Stiramati's argument about Okachara is actually refuting the opponent's arguments that Okachara requires 2 things and a similarity, right, between them. And therefore, Stiramati goes to systematically refute all different Indian theories of meaning, to say that the one is the Dravya, or one is the Vyakti, it's the universal, and so on, or the qualities. So basically, there is a par excellence understanding of metaphor there as linguistic. It's something that is driven from the Indian philosophy of language that is well aware of. And if you look at the, Keating is kind of pushing for that because he's dealing with Mukulabhata, which understand that as a superimposition, and he kind of reads that back. But you can understand still Mukulabhata is arguing for imposition and not making Stiramati into arguing the same. Because when you see that the understanding of Okachara as superimposition arrives very late, arrives also very late in Bhartrahari. It's not really in Bhartrahari, in the Vakyapadiyya or the Vritti. It appears with the later commentaries of Punyaraja and Helaraja that are more into presenting an Advaita Vedanta perspective. And for them, Adhyaropa and Samaropa is very important in that sense. So I still, and also Vinitadeva, I agree completely with what you showed, that he understands that as superimposition, and this is why he also equates Yebartopa, Okachara and Prajnapti. He doesn't see any difference between them, because for him it's all just convention. But for Stiramati there is a difference. He doesn't think that this is a kind of cognitive imposition. He thinks that it's a linguistic use that is involved with cognitive imposition of appearances on the transformation of consciousness, but this is not the Okachara. Okachara is linguistic. This is still my view, even after the book is published, and I have a chance to reconsider, because I think it comes from the context. The context makes it very clear that it's linguistic. And this is why, one of the reasons I went so deeply and back into the context to argue that, because I knew of the Adhyaropa, about the superimposition argument. Thank you for your first comment about the talk about the ultimate, but as you know, and of course you mentioned that after that the Yogācāra is not really thinking that it can express the ultimate reality in the sense that it's anapilapya and so on. It's inexpressible, but they figure out, so they don't really think that language can capture ultimate reality, and the Yogācāra philosophers, we kind of forget that. The Yogācāra philosophers do not see themselves as Yogācārans, at the beginning at least. Right? There's no such school as Yogācāra until very late. It appears as a doxographic category in Bhava Viveka's Madhyamika Hridaya and Targajvala, but Vasubandhu and Asanga, they refer to themselves as Mahayana. And they also quote from the Prajnaparamita and even Stiramati, where you can say that this is actually where you have Yogācāra created as a school, as a synthesis between the kind of the Asanga works and the Vasubandhu works, the Yogācāra Bhumi and so on. Even he doesn't use that term. So they consider themselves to be also committed to sutras like the Prajnaparamita, and they cite from it, although they have their own Sandhinirmochana and so on, sutras that are more tightly connected to them. So they don't think that they can express the ultimate, but they think that they can get much more closer in that sense, as you indicated. And if I can ask you to go back to previous, the one that you cite from Vasubandhu, the Dignagas Paksha, this. So I'm also thinking that Vasubandhu is, I agree with you, is using metaphor in that sense, but he's using it in the, this is what I think, he's using it in the kind of the Abhidharma use of it, mostly in hermeneutical context. That is, he takes it from the Mimamsa, and the Abhidharma took it from the Mimamsa. The Abhidharma was very much concerned in making claims for the authority of their texts and the reading of the scripture, and they use Okachara metaphor in the sense that when you say something, you denote something indirectly with another term, like when you say another example of Vasubandhu is the birth of the Buddha is happiness, taken from the Dhammapada. How can birth be happiness? Right? So here is an Okachara. So it mostly has to do with hermeneutical interpretation of texts and nothing much more metaphysical in that sense. And the mantra Kroshanti is actually the Nyaya Sutra, and you mentioned that later on. It talks about two kinds of upachara. There is the Lakshana upachara and Gauni vritti. So the Lakshana upachara would be various kinds of metaphors. Mancha Kroshanti would be that kind of Lakshana, which is a metaphor by proximity. So the cots are crying, or it's basically saying the seats are shouting, like in a theater show or in a sports competition, So instead of saying the crowd is shouting, you say the seats, the tribunes, or what they say, are shouting. Or when you say a village on the Ganges, right? A village cannot be on the Ganges, right? It's a village by the Ganges. So that's a Lakshana. It's a metaphor where you have two words, two entities that are connected by various relations. And when Vignaga talks about Paksha, he talks about that. Stiramati is solely using the other type of metaphor, the Gauni vritti. That is a metaphor of two things and a similarity between them. It doesn't refer at all to Lakshana upachara. And it's important for him because of his metaphysical investment in upachara. So for him, the example of Agnir Manavakaha, the boy is fire, or the boy is Simha Manavakaha, the boy is a tiger, or the Bahike Gao, the Bahika is a bull, are all figurative usage that is based on similarity between qualities. And this is more important for him. And then so I think he is different from Vasubandhu in the sense that he moves away from the use of metaphor in that, not so much in understanding it as linguistically, but understanding it as hermeneutically and connected to the meaning of text. He's more interested in what happens with the reference of upachara, and Vasubandhu is not interested with that. And you can actually see that in Stiramati's commentary on the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya, where Vasubandhu talks about upachara in this hermeneutical, very flat way, and Stiramati says, this is upachara, everything is upachara in the world and in treatises. It's actually a reference to the Trimchika Bhashya. There is an intertextual connection. So he pushes Vasubandhu. Stiramati is traditionally a commentator, and people usually took him to be kind of a boring and very undaring philosophical figure, but he's actually, with the rhetoric of commentary, he's moving away from Vasubandhu. And then what comes next? Right, an issue with the critique of the Madhyamaka. Could you please put the last, I think it's the last, or the one before last slide. Oh, before that, the one before that, yeah. Okay, this is the Mukhya and Gaura. Okay, so this is important for me to emphasize. I don't think that Stiramati is arguing that there is no Mukhya Padartha. There is no, Mukhya is primary, right? Like main, and also an object to refer to. He says in the Trimchika Bhashya, there is no primary object in the sense of ordinary object. What you have only is the transformation of consciousness. The transformation of consciousness is actually a Mukhya Padartha. But because it's Pratitya Samutpada, it doesn't have any fixed position. That is, you have, what is it that you say in this bottle is actually, there's no bottle there. There's no Mukhya Padartha in that sense. There is only an appearance of a bottle that appears as if external because of the various causal processes of the transformation of consciousness. So the word bottle actually refers to the processes, to the causal processes. This is the Mukhya Padartha. But then the Mukhya Padartha never has a finite content. You can never say, give a full description of this Mukhya Padartha. Only a Buddha can do that. but a Mukhya Padartha, it's entire causality. So what differentiates between the Mukhya Padartha of this bottle and this glass, right? It's just a convention. So I think that he's not saying that there's no Mukhya Padartha, but the Mukhya Padartha is Nirabhinavya. It's inexpressible.
But doesn't he, there's no Mukhya Padartha?
Yeah, but when he says there specifically there's no Mukhya Padartha, he refers to the Mukhya Padartha in the sense of ordinary objects, conventional objects, not ultimately.
I would call Vijayapariṇāma is Pradhana.
Padartha, yeah.
I would distinguish
Yeah.
Pradhana.
Right, okay, so I would, okay, but I mean there is a kind of a reference, but the reference is only for the Buddha. Right, you're right, Pradhana is a better one. But Pradhana also, in Sanskrit grammatical terms, refers to a referential pole. Right, Pradhana is what you designate. Yeah. And what happens with the Madhyamika? I should maybe get my Madhyamika right. I mean, you're a person, and once you're saying that, I'm taking that as a pramana. You know, it's a kind of pramana Bhuta, and so I'll go back and look at that. But what I wanted to say is that of course, the Madhyamika has a way of talking about ultimate reality, and it also has hermeneutics, right? The Nitartha, Nayartha distinction, and within the understanding of language as convention. So you have different ways of talking, a justification of philosophical discourse. But it's not that but the Yogācāra represents a different offshot of development of Buddhism, to my understanding. It relies on the Mahayana Sutras, but it comes with a very strong Abhidharma connection. The Abhidharma factory is still working. It's a new management in the factory, but you still have the production line, and the workers, they're working with the same categories and so on. And they have meditation, they have its ultimate realities, they have emptiness, it's inexpressible, but they also have this very elaborate metaphysical discourse that they're stuck with. And the Madhyamika doesn't have, it has this kind of dialectical method of saying, well, you think it's a svabhava, no, it's empty, basically. And there is a difference in the discourse, and now they have to justify that very discourse. So they have to have a different theory of meaning. I understand their move is mostly defensive against the Madhyamika, not necessarily successful, but defensive, but there are also benefits in their system, other benefits for that as well. And I think this is what I have to say about the Okachara response to the Madhyamika. So they wouldn't say, they agree that everything is conventional and empty, but they want to hold this distinction within convention, different, because of the three natures and because of their Abhidharma roots. Thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you. Well, it's already past their time, but well, if there's any...
I'm sorry for taking so long to answer.
If you have any comments or questions, just one. Okay. So please introduce yourself very briefly.
I'm Chihiro. I'm a research assistant at Yokota University, and I'm not so familiar with this field, so my question may be too simple or out of topic, but I have a question regarding Yogācāra's actual use of language. And it is interesting to learn how Yogācārans understand language, and language is always figurative. And I would like to know if such attitude or their view is reflected in their actual operation of language. Like you pointed out that their view enables them to discuss things in a way which is not just negative, but do they have any special expression or saying when they discuss their discourses?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll see if I understood your question. You're basically asking if they're trying to develop a different alternative language. That is, if they have their particular expressions that they use in metaphors, so instead of saying a person, they use something else. They don't. This is philosophy, and when you look at their scripture, they don't now use a particular language, which is different, but they use a lot of metaphors. Everything that is important in the Yogācāra philosophy, but not just, I think also in Mahayana, is explained by metaphors, the metaphors of the elephant, the metaphors. You can find key metaphors there, and wherever they use that with the awareness of that theory of language in mind, I think that at least in several cases they do. In the book I'm trying to show that the Sangha, in the Yogācāra Bhumi, the Vinishchaya Sangrahani, if it's indeed the Sangha that's writing it, is actually using these examples with understanding of what is metaphor, kind of philosophically. But they don't say, now we use metaphor because it's this, because of the theory. And it's also present very much in Stiramati, which is kind of the apex of that. The theory is not so much present in earlier philosophers, in that sense. I hope I... Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hall. It's amazing that you just landed in Japan yesterday, and your head is very sharp and very energetic. We really enjoy and we really appreciate your this special lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.